Thank you for the short interlude. Thank you for your patience. We're going to begin by first looking at perhaps one of the most popular worldviews in our country at the moment, which is humanism. How many of you know what I mean by humanism or secular humanism? So anybody want to give me an answer? We pick on somebody. Aaron, you're the philosopher. What is secular humanism?
Salvation, if it comes through humanity.
Excellent. So it's a worldview that centers on man, and the idea of progress is central to humanism. The idea that the ultimate purpose of mankind is to progress in every area. And mostly these days, humanism is tied to atheism. Not all humanists are atheists, but most will be, and a good majority of them will be naturalists or materialists. So that means that they believe only in matter. They would deny the supernatural realm. And so the most of them will be atheistic. It's perhaps one of the most I think, most visible worldviews, loudest, most noisy worldviews in this country. Why? Because many of our most celebrated icons and celebrities and comedians happen to be humanists. So if you think about Ricky Gervais, for example, would be an atheistic humanist. One of my favorite comedians, I'm sorry, he makes me laugh. I don't know what to tell you. Also, Stephen Fry would be a humanist. Brian Cox, if you've watched Wonders of the Universe. He's got a really annoying voice, but he's brilliant. He's a great broadcaster. So Brian Cox, and of course, Richard Dawkins would be an atheist humanist. And so statistically, humanism is not the most popular worldview in the UK, but it is arguably one of the most influential that we have, particularly prevalent in institutions, universities, places like that. You're going to find humanism is very well presented and supported. And so humanism, it's important that we understand the claims of secular humanism, because if you were to ask that question to a secular humanist, you're going to get a response, something like, oh, so you're saying that I can't be good unless I believe in God? So you're saying that I need God to tell me how to behave? Well, I know atheists that are better behaved than Christians. You're going to get laughed at, okay? And most atheists, most humanists rather, though they will have a atheistic worldview, they won't believe in the existence of God, they won't believe in the supernatural, the miraculous, they will have a strong idea of morality. They will have a very strong moral compass. If you've watched the Stephen Fry interview, how many of you have seen that from about 10, 15 years ago when he's asked the question, what would you say if God was real and you met him at the pearly gates? What would you say? Have you seen that? And it's just like he boils over with rage. And he's like, I would say, how dare you, you mean, capricious God? And then goes through a list of things that he finds to be abhorrent about the world and blames God for suffering in the world. And so there's clearly a very strong moral compass in the heart of a man like Stephen Fry. And I think that is something I see in most humanists that I know. They don't believe in God, but they're also very angry at God. But they also have a very strong idea of right and wrong. But what we're going to ask the question tonight is that sense of right and wrong justified on humanism? Can we actually rationally believe in objective moral values if there is no God? So if we look briefly at humanism, this is from the humanist.org.uk website, and it says this: roughly speaking, The word humanist has come to mean someone who, and notice the slight difference here between what we would understand as humanism originally, the humanist philosophers, and what is described as humanism here. So now, this has come to mean someone who, number one, trusts to the scientific method when it comes to understanding how the universe works and rejects the idea of the supernatural and is therefore an atheist or agnostic. Do we know what's meant by atheist? So, theist, okay, no God, and gnosis, no knowledge. So it's not very good to be an agnostic, so you're just claiming that you don't know. No knowledge, okay? So an atheist or an agnostic. Number two, that was a joke, by the way, don't worry about it. Number two, makes their ethical decisions based on reason, empathy, and a concern for human beings and other sentient animals. And number three, believes that in the absence of an afterlife and any discernible purpose to the universe, human beings can act to give their own lives meaning by seeking happiness in this life and helping others to do the same. So here we have a commitment to the scientific method as the way by which the humanist understands the universe. So there's an implicit trust in the idea that science can tell us truth about the universe and that we can perceive and understand what science tells us about the universe. There's a large degree of trust in science. Secondly, there is a belief that a humanist can make ethical decisions, and these are determined by reason, not by revelation from God, but simply by using our reason. So again, a trust in reason, human reason, to be able to lead us to truth, and not just truth abstractly, but moral truth, the truth about what is good and evil, the truth about what is right and wrong. So just explain these terms just quickly. Good and evil, okay? Good and evil are moral values, okay? They're slightly different from right and wrong. So, for example, I'll use a way of explaining that's used by one of the philosophers we've talked about before, William Lane Craig. And he says, listen, it would be good for you to be a doctor. It's a good thing to be somebody who can help others who are suffering with various illnesses and maladies. That would be a good thing. But it may not be right for you to be a doctor. It may be right for you to be something else. And so right and wrong are about obligations. That's about moral duties, whereas good and evil are statements of value, what is either objectively good or objectively evil. And the humanist, the atheist, believes that these moral values can be arrived at, can be discovered or discerned by reason alone, and empathy and a concern for human beings. So there should be reason, there should be empathy, there should be concern for other human beings and sentient animals. And also they believe there's no afterlife or any really discernible purpose to the universe. So the humanist denies an overall purpose to the universe, but says that human beings can act to give their own lives meaning by seeking happiness in this life and helping others to do the same. Okay, so we've got some things to ponder there. The question is, can you actually be good without God? Can you actually discern what is morally good if there is no God? Now, as I said earlier, if you ask that question, can you be good without God, you're likely to get a somewhat angry response from a humanist who'd be like, how arrogant of you as a Christian to presume that I can't be a moral person? Are you saying that unless I believe in your God and read his 10 commandments that I can't be moral? Well, I'll tell you what, I'm a darn sight better than most Christians I've met. You'll get something like that. But the question is not, can you be good without believing in God? That's not what we're asking tonight. We're not asking the question either, can you be good without knowing God's commands? We're asking the question, can you be good without God. Now, if we assume that there is no God for a moment, let's just assume that there's no God. Is it even plausible, given a godless universe, that good and evil actually exist in any kind of meaningful sense? Think about that for a moment. If there's no God, if we all just came from a random, purposeless explosion. By the way, nothing doesn't explode. I don't know if you ever thought about that. You thought about that before? Evolution, on some level, can give answers like Chit Cow talked about the other week. If we talk about microevolution, for example, that can give us answers about how finches have different types of beaks. It can tell us information about how some species developed in a certain way as opposed to others. What evolution cannot do is explain how you get something from nothing. Now, nothing is nothing, and nothing doesn't become something. If you have absolutely nothing, all you will ever have is absolutely nothing. And nothing doesn't explode. Only something can explode. So anyway, if we came from a random explosion and all of a sudden matter explodes into space, there's no mind behind this. All it is particles bumping into one another. And over billions of years, these particles form into planets and form into solar systems. And then, hey presto, there's some primordial soup there. And that primordial soup gives rise to some single-celled organisms. Those single-celled organisms become multiple-cell organisms. And slowly, slimy creatures crawl out of the primordial soup and gain limbs and begin to walk around. At what point do those meaningless, purposeless creatures become moral agents with purpose? At what point do those bits of matter acquire meaning? Do you see what I'm getting at here? How can we understand good and evil actually existing if all the universe is just matter, just stuff? In order to call something good or evil, you also have to have a benchmark as a reference point. So if I just get Mike to come and stand here for me. Come on, Mike. Come on up. Give him a round of applause. He needs it tonight. Yeah? Here we go. So if I stand Mike here. Now, anybody ever seen curling before?
Yes.
In the Winter Olympics, all right? So I'm going to ask Garth to be one of our curling, what do you call them? Are they pucks?
Or bowling ball.
You know what I mean? It's like, so keep coming, Garth. Keep coming. You're slowing down now. There's people brushing in front of you, but it's not going to avail. You're going to stop there. Okay, so that's Garth's. What are they? Are they called pucks in curling? Stones. That stone is stopping there. All right. And now we've got another stone being rolled across the ice from the back. And I'm going to ask Reuben. You're the next stone, Reuben. All right, you've just been pushed and you're coming down the ice. He's coming at a quick pace. He's passing Garth. He's bumped him out the way. He's keeping going. Now they're brushing and he stopped. Okay, now in this game of curling, which stone is objectively closer to the mark, to Mike? Reuben. But I don't like that. I want Garth's stone to be closer. So I say Garth is closer. So there you go. Garth's closer. Anyone got anything to say about that? You're just going to have that, take it? I win. Garth's closer. I'm wrong. Why am I wrong?
Why do you say he's closer?
I just want him to be closer. I don't like Reuben winning. I want Garth to win. So
Yeah.
he's closer.
Subjective judgment, isn't it?
Pardon? I don't need to prove to you. I say that he is. I do. I am. Well, why am I wrong? All right, but why am I wrong that Garth isn't the closest?
Because he isn't.
What do you mean he isn't?
If you measured the distance.
If I what?
Measured the distance.
If I measured the distance. So what you're saying is, if I measure the distance, that objectively Reuben will be closer. Is that what you're saying? There we go. Okay, so the reason I'm wrong is that there are objective facts, because Mike is objectively placed here, and it actually doesn't matter what I like or don't like about the fact that Reuben is closer. He is closer, objectively, because Mike is occupying this space right here, and he is the closest distance to him. So to hell with what I think. I'm wrong if I say Garth is closer, aren't I? Thanks, guys. You can sit down. So when we talk about objective moral values and duties, in order to call something good or evil, or closer or further away, you see that I have to have an objective standard by which to judge that, don't I? Now, if Mike disappears and I ask him to sit down and we've just got Reuben and we've got Garth standing there, and then I ask the question, who's closer to Mike, but Mike's not there, it's an absurd question, isn't it? Because there is no objective place that Mike holds. And so relative questions about who is closer to him make no sense if there is no objective place that Mike takes up. Are you getting this? And so if there is nothing, there is no standard, objective standard of good or evil, then calling something good is absurd. It just means it's, in your opinion, it's good, which may have some value to you, but it doesn't reach beyond you. So when we talk about objective moral values, what we're saying is that something is objectively good for everyone, all of the time, and in every place. Does that make sense? That's an objective standard. So in order to call something good, we are presupposing an objective standard of the good in order to make that judgment. In the same way, in order to call something evil, we need an objective standard, a moral standard by which to judge what is good or evil that doesn't change dependent on what we prefer. If we look at what C.S. Lewis says here, he says, as an atheist, my argument against God was that the universe seemed so cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. Does that make sense? He's got a beautiful way of putting things, C.S. Lewis. A man doesn't know whether a line is crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. And we'll talk a bit about this later, but Genesis tells us that mankind was made uniquely in the image of God in Genesis chapter 1. There's no other animal species that the Bible says was made that way, in the image of God. Now, some theologians think that has something to do with the way that we're made. That God has implanted in us a conscience. And that conscience is constituent to every human being. Now, in some, it's more full and whole than in others. We wouldn't say that a Mother Teresa and an Adolf Hitler are exactly the same, that they had the same clarity about conscience, but there is a conscience that God has given to mankind that is not shared by every animal species. And that conscience can, in some senses, in a real sense, talk to us about morality and what is right and wrong, whether we're Christian or not. And so we can't really have an idea about what is right or wrong unless we have an objective standard, something to ground our morality in. Now, if there is no objective standard of good and evil, all we're left with is subjectivity, okay? All we're left with is preference. I like this type of morality, and you like that type of morality. But there's no way to adjudicate between the two. I like chocolate ice cream, you like vanilla. But who's right? We don't know. I could force you to like chocolate ice cream. I could write a law that says chocolate ice cream is best. I could make you sign it. But does that make me right? Well, no. I'm just exerting power. Subjectivism is what we're left with if there is no objective standard of morality. It just comes down to preference. And if that's the case, if there is no objective standard of morality, then what we're left with is that we have no real justification to call something objectively evil. Now that's scary. If there's no objective standard, if there's no God to anchor morality in, and we just live in a godless, purposeless, ultimately meaningless universe, which is what the humanist website says, where are we getting morality from? Where do we ground right and wrong? Is it just up to us? Just individually to create our own moral codes? Or do we go with the prevailing views of society at our time? Is morality just a vote system that, as long as we all agree on what we think is right and wrong, then there's our moral code? Well, if that is the case, then we can't judge another culture, can we? Because their moral code has come differently and may be different where they are. And therefore, we lose the ability to judge other cultures' morality. We can no longer say that the Nazis did what was evil. We can just say they did what we didn't prefer. They did something that's not popular in our time. But we couldn't really call it evil. That would be to presuppose an objective standard of good and evil. So you can see the problem. Now, there's one argument outlined by, these days, the popular defender of this argument is William Lane Craig, the moral argument. This is one way that Christians have argued for morality being, in a sense, a proof of the existence of God. There are lots of different moral arguments, so I wouldn't say this is the only one, nor would I say it's necessarily the best, but it is one of them that's easy to memorize and is certainly, I think, has been persuasive and has been debated many times. So it goes like this. There are three premises. If God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist. That's the first premise. The second premise is objective moral values and duties do exist. Now, this is a funny one because I will come to this one later, but interestingly, there are a lot of people who say, well, I just don't believe in objective morality. I think everything is just relative. Watch what happens when you steal their lunchbox. Watch what happens when you steal their wallet. All of a sudden, now there's objective morality. What you did is wrong. And you actually find at an academic level, a lot of people will admit that there are such things as objective moral values and duties. And instinctively, I think most people know that to be the case. Most people know it's wrong to be violent to a child, no matter what you believe. Most people know it's wrong to rape, okay? You don't have to teach somebody that most often. People know that that's wrong, and it doesn't matter where you are when you do it. It's objectively wrong. If you commit that crime on Mars, you're still committing an evil act. Thirdly, therefore, the conclusion, God exists. So it's three premises that Lane Craig argues for. If God does not exist, objective morals and values and duties do not exist, which we've already argued for. Number two, objective moral values and duties do exist. Very simply, it follows, therefore, that God exists. Now, we can look at some of the premises here, but this is a deductive argument. So the premises follow naturally to a conclusion. And so it's a logically coherent argument. There is a lot to each of the premises that I won't have time to go into all of it tonight, but I would encourage, if you're interested to read more about it, I've put some books at the front. On Guard, William Lane Craig, he's got a chapter in there about it. But for more depth on it, Reasonable Faith is another good book to read, outlining some of the objections. I can't go into all of the objections tonight, but we will talk a little bit about some of them now. So that's the moral argument. Now, of course, just because you can state the argument doesn't mean people are going to be convinced by it. A humanist is going to say, God, we don't need God to be good. Okay, we know lots of atheists who are good. We don't need the Bible to tell us what is right or wrong. Now, is it true that somebody could make good moral decisions without an appeal to God? Is it true that an atheist, in a sense, can be a very moral person? Who thinks that's true? I think that's true. I don't think you have to be a Christian to discover what's moral, what pattern of behavior is right or wrong. It's abundantly clear that the Christian worldview accepts that as true as well. Everybody has a moral conscience of sorts, but the Christian position is not that one cannot know right from wrong without God. That's not what we're arguing for. We're not saying that as an atheist you can't know what's right or wrong. What we're saying is that without God, right and wrong as objective moral values simply cannot or do not exist. So the moral argument here is an argument from ontology. That means the idea of being, rather than an argument of epistemology, the idea of how we know something. Now, I want to just give you a quote here from Richard Dawkins. I remember doing a module at university. I studied theology at uni, and one of my favourite modules of the course was about New Atheism. And this is going back to 2006, and New Atheism. Do you know what New Atheism is when I talk about that? So we're talking about Richard Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, Sam Harris, and these guys came out of various fields of science. So Dawkins is a biologist, and they became really popular in the early 2000s, particularly in the wake of 9/11. There was a lot of backlash against religion at that time, and they became very popular. And one of Dawkins' quotes I'm going to put to you this evening just underscores the fact that on an atheistic view, it's not that I'm saying that this is the result of atheism. This is atheists saying what we believe means there is no objective moral values, okay? So Dawkins says the universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, and no good. Nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. That's from Dawkins' book, River Out of Eden. So this is an atheist from the horse's mouth saying, if we're right, then there's no such thing as good or evil. There's just blind, pitiless indifference. Now, what was interesting in my university course was that the documentary we watched together was Dawkins basically saying how awful it is and how wrong it is that Christians would dare to have an influence in young people's lives and want to brainwash their children into believing what they believe. And in the whole documentary, he's obviously making a case for what? For the existence of evil, despite saying there is no evil, there is no good. So in essence, we don't need God in order to know the difference between right and wrong. We need God to exist in order for good and evil to even exist at all. And making an appeal to right or wrong, we really do require an objective standard in order to make that distinction. So why do we as Christians have good reason for believing in objective moral values? Well, if the universe, instead of just exploding from nothing in a purposeless, meaningless fashion, instead of that, we believe that the universe has been designed and created by a personal, moral being called God, the Christian God. And therefore, we have an ontological basis. We have a real basis for believing in right and wrong as moral values, because the creator of the universe is a moral being. He's a person. And this morality flows from his very nature. It flows from his character. And therefore, these moral values are anchored in him. They're outside of us. Whether we agree with his moral code or not, it doesn't matter. It exists, and we can disagree with it, but it's not going to change the fact that it exists, that there are such things as right and wrong. So right and wrong and good and evil, therefore, are not invented. They're not social constructs, and they're not things that happened as a byproduct of evolution, but they are anchored in the very nature and being of God himself, and they flow from him, and they are seen both in natural revelation, in the conscience, and also more specially in his revealed word, in the Ten Commandments, in God's scriptures. Now, if the universe has not been designed and is the product of random chance, then we've got no basis for believing, as I say, in objective moral standards and values. So, what about, let's just think for a moment, if evolution were true, if macroevolution were true, and it was a godless process, okay? It's not theistic evolution, but rather is a godless, random, mindless process. Could we even arrive at knowledge about morality? Think of it for a second. If we were never designed to think, your brains are just a random assortment of matter and chemicals, and you are just meat all the way through. There's no such thing as self. There's no mind. There's no soul. All that's illusory. You are just meat all the way down. You're just like a highly evolved bit of protoplasm fizzing in a petri dish, so to speak. How can you trust that you're going to be able to reason your way to truth? Why would that be something you could think you could do? And I like this C.S. Lewis quote here. It just puts it much better than I think anyone else probably could. He says this: supposing there was no intelligence behind the universe, no creative mind, in that case, nobody designed my brain for the purpose of thinking. It is merely that when atoms inside my skull happen for physical or chemical reasons to arrange themselves in a certain way, this gives me as a byproduct the sensation I call thought. But if so, how can I trust my own thinking to be true? It's like upsetting a milk jug and hoping that the way it splashes itself will give you a map of London. But if I can't trust my own thinking, of course I can't trust the arguments leading to atheism, and therefore have no reason to be an atheist or anything else. Unless I believe in God, I cannot believe in thought. So I can never use thought to disbelieve in God. I don't know if you followed that, but that's fascinating, isn't it? Think of it. If you are just a highly evolved animal, there is no self, there is no soul, there is no mind. You're just meat all the way down, and you just evolved in a blind, purposeless way. Then C.S. Lewis is right. Nobody designed your brain for a purpose. No one designed your brain to think. What you call thought is just your cells reacting to your environment. You're not autonomous in a sense. You are just reacting to your environment. In a sense, you're not free. And this is one thing that even Charles Darwin admitted. When he talked about morality in The Origin of the Species, he said, it's quite possible. He believed that morality essentially was a byproduct of evolution, that at some point in our distant past, moral values and duties kind of emerged in order to give some sort of benefit to the survival of your genes, okay? Herd mentality. Think of baboons, for example. You know, they're going to protect one another. They're going to act with a herd mentality. They're going to protect the younger ones because they're the ones that are going to propagate the DNA, could keep the, what do you call a herd of baboons? What are they? Does anybody know what a group of baboons is called? I don't. But it's going to keep the herd going to the next generation. So we protect the young ones, okay? That might look like kindness, but actually there's self-interest there, okay? And Darwin believed that sort of morality was a byproduct of the evolutionary process, something that helped previous generations to survive. But what he said was that if humanity had developed in a different way, let's say in a different environment than the one we developed in, let's say we'd been put in an environment and we'd evolved more like bees than like humans, then morality could be very different. Okay? So you can see now that on an evolutionary atheistic view, there's no actual good reason to suggest that reason is reliable. There's no foundation for believing that our minds were designed to think. Even the idea of mind becomes a challenge, because if we're all just meat all the way down, we're just cells, then really we are essentially reacting to our environment. That's why some prominent Darwinian atheistic thinkers are moving away from the classic theory of evolution. Thomas Nagel is a philosopher and has found this a real problem in his thinking because of the idea of conscience and autonomy, and is moving away from that, hard materialism into something else. I hope you're sticking with me here. It will go somewhere eventually. We will get somewhere by the end of the evening. But mindless matter, right? Mindless matter, which is what we have to start with and what we have on purely atheistic Darwinian evolutionary processes, is mindless matter reacting with other mindless matter. All that can ever produce is more mindless matter. If you've only ever got cells, you only got bricks, okay? Just natural materials. At what point do immaterial realities come into play? You cannot get the immaterial from the material. Think about the laws of logic on a purely material universe. Something like the laws of logic, which are true everywhere, in every place, at every time. Okay? Where do you get that from if all you've got is matter? So the idea that a purely biological machine, which is the product of a mindless, purposeless process of evolution, which exists within a purely material universe without any mind or purpose behind it, the idea of that then appealing to ultimate moral standards of right or wrong is absurd. On that view, all morality could ever be would be some sort of self-interest to propagate my DNA to the next generation. Now, maybe if you're speaking to a humanist, an atheist, they might say, well, I'm not arguing for objective morality here. I'm not saying that there is a objective standard of right or wrong that's true everywhere for everyone at all times. I'm not arguing for that. They might say, I'm actually arguing for moral relativism. I'm just saying that there are such things as moral values and duties that are true for the individual. Okay, it's true for me. May not be true for you, but I believe this is right and wrong, and this is how I live my life. And so I believe in that kind of morality. Okay. Or maybe they might say, well, I believe in a morality that exists within societies and cultures. There's a moral code that we all subscribe to in this country, and we agree what's right and what's wrong. And if you step out of line with that, then you're wrong. You know, if 80% of us in this country believe that to wear red on Sundays is a sin, then you're wrong if you wear red on Sundays. See what I mean? Morality is determined by the majority. Or they might say, listen, right and wrong is determined by legislation. If the government says it's wrong, it's wrong. If the government says it's right, it's right. Now that might sound easier to defend from a philosophical position, but the problem is that moral relativism is kind of completely untenable, I think, and can't be really consistently adopted by anyone who does actually really believe in right and wrong. So, on individualistic relativism, that is, what's true for me is true for me only, and my view of right and wrong extends only to my choices and actions. The problem with that is, of course, I can't condemn anybody else. I had a friend who was, very cross with me about, I think I talked about another religion and said that it wasn't a way to God. I basically said Christ is the only way to God. This person got very angry at me. And so I think he may have wrote a long comment on one of my social media posts. And I said, why don't we just go for a sit down? Let's have a sit down and a chat. So we had a sit down and a chat. And over this pint conversation, he said to me, look, I'm a moral relativist. He said, I don't believe that there's just this one system and code of morality. He said, I believe that different people can have their own moral codes. They can make their own decisions about what's right and wrong. But then proceeded to tell me that I was wrong for being intolerant. And I said, well, you can't do that. Well, I can, I've just done it. But I thought you just said that there's no objective standard of right and wrong, that we all just make up our own minds. But now you're telling me I've got to abide by your moral standard and be tolerant to everyone. Why? I don't want to. Well, you've got to. Well, now we're talking about something other than moral relativity. Now we're talking about an objective standard of right and wrong. So on individualistic moral relativism, the idea that we all have our own moral codes and we just live together doing our own thing. It sounds great, it's the hippie ideal, but actually it doesn't work in reality because most people are going to live as though there is such a thing as objective moral standards and values. And on that view, of course, we wouldn't be able to really call a Mother Teresa good, would we? She was just living by her moral code, doing her thing. We couldn't call Hitler evil. Again, it's just our moral preferences. On cultural and societal relativism, a culture's normative moral standards is what determines what's right and wrong. So, it's basically we decide what is right and wrong based on how many of us agree what is right and wrong. Now, the problem with this view is that we wouldn't be able to condemn certain cultures for their moral choices. If that was the consensus in that culture at the time, it was just what most people thought was good. Now, it might shock you, but high-ranking Nazis in the Second World War era did not believe they were committing evil in the extermination of the Jews. Many of them believed they were doing society a greater good in the final solution. They didn't think they were committing evil. Most of them were in on the idea of getting this done at some level. Now, if we believe in cultural, societal relativism, i.e. what a culture decides is right for them, we then lose the ability to criticize the morality of another culture. Does that make sense? So the practice of sati in India, which was the idea that if a man died and left his widow, the widow would be burned alive on his funeral pyre. Morally abhorrent. We would lose the ability to say that is evil because that was the prevailing culture. in the nation at that time. And therefore, we can't criticize it because it was their moral code. And thirdly, if we look at this idea of government legislation, of whatever is legal, if it's legal, it's good. If it's illegal, it's bad. Again, we fall foul of Nazi Germany because rounding up Jews was legal. Putting them in concentration camps was legal. Therefore, we would not be able to call that evil. Or moreover, in America, we would not be able to celebrate with the slave who broke free of his slave master since he had broken the law. And therefore, he was the one committing wrong. So morality is not something you can legislate. We believe in objective morality. It doesn't matter what a government legislates, okay? It doesn't matter how many people say something is good. If God says it's evil, it's evil. Now, if as soon as a humanist accepts that morality is relative, they give up the ability to demand certain moral standards to be held. For example, humanist ideology, it will constantly make appeals to tolerance. You need to be tolerant. You should tolerate others. You shouldn't preach about what we should believe. But if morality is relative to you and you get to decide what's right for you, I get to decide what's right for me, then a humanist has really no grounds to demand that we all be tolerant. Really, that's up to me, right? I get to decide what's right for me. The same questions arise when we think of the idea that morality is just a hangover from biology, from evolution. This is the idea that observed moral values and duties, right and wrong, good and evil, they're just the byproduct of the evolutionary process. Richard Dawkins said, "We are machines built by DNA whose purpose is to make more copies of the same DNA." This is exactly what we are for. We are machines for propagating DNA, and the propagation of DNA is a self-sustaining process. It is every living object's sole reason for living. And then Michael Ruse, a late philosopher of science and an atheist, he said this: "The position of the modern evolutionist is that humans have an awareness of morality because such an awareness is of biological worth. Morality is just a biological adaptation, no less than our hands and feet and teeth. Considered as a rationally justifiable set of claims and about an objective something, ethics is illusory." I appreciate that when somebody says, "Love thy neighbor as thyself," they think they're referring above and beyond themselves. Nevertheless, such a reference is truly without foundation. Morality is just an aid to survival and reproduction, and any deeper meaning is illusory. Did you catch that final sentence there? So morality really isn't morality. It's not something outside of ourselves. It's just a hangover from biology, and it was at some point an aid to survival and reproduction. That's all it is. Anything else is just illusory on atheism. Now, what the problem with that is that if what we call good are just merely actions that protect and preserve the interests of our herd, can we really call those actions good? Because the subject of those good actions is not to do good, it's just simply obeying biological impulses. Moreover, there are plenty of actions that would be viewed as reprehensible, as bad to most humanists, that do in fact benefit my chances of propagating my DNA. Now think, for example, I'd have a greater chance of propagating my DNA to the next generation if I were to be a polygamist. If I were to be promiscuous, I might have a better chance of securing my DNA to the next generation. But most atheist humanists would find that idea abhorrent and wrong. Equally, on an evolutionary model, surely this is going to be abhorrent, but surely we should sterilize the handicapped. Right? If we're about the health and strength of the next generation, surely it would be morally good to make sure that those who have defective DNA do not pass that DNA onto the next generation. Am I right? On a purely evolutionary model of morality, would that not be considered the good? Certainly if morality was driven by biological survival, that's what you'd expect. But that's not what our intuition tells us. On a naturalistic atheist view, man is just a highly evolved ape. He's meat all the way through, and you women as well. There's no mind, no soul, no self, just matter. And any sense of morality is just the product of your five senses. So if you are just a highly evolved member of the animal kingdom, okay, think about this. Think about the animal kingdom to which you belong on an atheistic model. When a lion kills a zebra, it does not murder the zebra. It kills the zebra, but does not murder it. Or a male great white shark will forcibly copulate with a female. The shark copulates with her, but he does not rape her. It's just what animals do. Now, why are the rules different with humans if we are just highly evolved animals? Isn't it just speciesism to favor humankind over less evolved animal relatives and treat them as though they are different? Now, I've shown, I think, that secular humanism presupposes objective moral values. It presupposes that human flourishing is good. Why? Why would that be good? It presupposes that it is good to do unto others as you would have done to yourself. But if there is no objective standard of morality, how can we call that good? We've shown that it's unable to successfully ground objective moral values and duties. Equally, the duties thing is something I've not really talked about. We talk mostly about values, but duties is a sense of obligation to do what is right. Now, even if we could argue that objective moral values like good and evil do exist on an atheistic view, let's just presuppose that they do. Let's just presuppose that these things do somehow exist out there in some abstract way. Even if they do, what would be the obligation for you to actually perform those things? What would be the obligation that you must be good? Is this making sense? So if on a Christian view, we have a God who is a moral being who has laws, he is also going to hold accountable every human being for the things that they have done right and the things they've done wrong. So there is a very strong obligation and incentive to be good on a Christian view because we have a moral being who has made his laws clear, and we have in his laws written down that he will actually hold accountable those who do good and evil. There is punishment for evil eternally, and there is reward for good. But on an atheistic view, even if we have good and evil, where would the obligation come from to actually do those things? Where's the duty coming from? Now, in our human experience, we prima facie know that moral values and duties do exist. There's an instinct. We live as though they do. Even if you deny that they exist, most atheists are going to live as though there is such a thing as objective good and evil. I believe that's because we're all made in the image of God. I believe that's because, in a sense, it's hardwired into us. that these things do really exist. The Christian worldview not only accounts for the existence of objective moral values and duties, but it also includes, as I say, real accountability. Now, I believe that God is the best explanation for the world that we live in. I believe that he's the best explanation for our views about morality. And I believe that Christianity gives us a really strong case for arguing that. And I believe that tonight I've shown that there are holes in that humanistic worldview, that it's inconsistent to live as though there were objective moral values and duties if you don't believe or if you think there is no God. Does that make sense? Well, I hope that's been interesting. I'm going to park it there, and we're going to have a couple of questions before we finish for you to think through. The first one's a cheeky one. Don't worry if this one causes you to think a little bit and get a bit tired, but I'm going to give it you anyway. I hope you know my answer to the question is, can you be good without God? I'm going to say no. I don't, because I think you need that objective standard. I know what people would say. So, well, I can be good according to my moral standard. Okay, but objectively good. In order to be objectively good, you have to presuppose a standard for that. And I believe the best way to ground that, the most convincing way to ground that is God. I think that's the best explanation. But anyway, so questions. You post a Bible verse on your social media. Luke 6, 27, 28. Love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you. An atheist friend pops up in the comments with a little question for you. Is something good because God wills it? Or does God will something because it is good? How do you respond? So you can turn around, groups of however many, 5 or 6, 4, 5, 6, whatever. Turn around and discuss, and we'll have a go at responding. It's a cheeky question. You may have heard it before. It's quite old, but have a go at formulating an answer. How would you respond to this? couple more minutes and then we'll get some feedback. All right, you want to draw your discussions to a close? We'll get a bit of feedback. Group at the back, can I pick on Belinda? Come and share what you guys were discussing.
Thank you very much, Graham. I think the conclusion we came to was that our brain hurt. But yes, we decided that I think that something was good because God had willed it. I don't think we came to any sort of consensus on the other bit. And we thought it was quite a very hard thing to decide. And but we did agree, I think, that something was good because God willed it, and we hadn't come to any conclusion about the other bit. Okay.
Thank you. Brilliant. Other groups, brave enough to come down the front. Reuben, I'm going to pick on you. Come down the front. Where was your discussion leading you?
I always sort of said from the start of the Bible, when God created the world, you can see that his will for it was good at the start, but obviously the story about Adam and Eve and all that kind of stuff. And then again, loving your enemies and doing good to those who hate you. It's basically Jesus lived like that. He loved his enemies. If you look at when he was on the cross and when he was crucified, he didn't show anger to them. He showed love to them. Even those who was hating him and saying crucify him, he still showed love to those. So yeah, that's the only way I could sort of look at it, really. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you. Another group. Yeah, Phil, come on up.
Well, as Belinda said, our brains hurt as well. But we actually thought it was a false alternative because we didn't think that either of them were true. Because if you take the first one, then God could will something on day one, and therefore it would be good. He could will the opposite on day two, and that would be good as well. So we don't think that could possibly be right. And the second one we felt couldn't be right because it presupposed that God was willing something that was good, and that goodness was something outside of God. And that would mean, of course, that God wouldn't be God. So what we really thought was that neither of those are true, and that the truth of the matter is that because God is good, he is innately good, and therefore he wants to share with us everything that is good. And so the answer would be with that Bible verse, I'm telling you to love your enemies and all the rest of it, because that is what I am like. That's what we thought.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, any other groups want to come and share? Come on up, Dean, and then Aaron, you want to come down as well?
Yeah, I think our brains were also hurting on this one a little bit, and yeah, it felt a little bit kind of chicken and egg, and what comes first here. So we kind of thought, well, it's obviously a trap in one sense, but we didn't quite know what the trap was. So if you answer it this way, where's that going to go? And if you answer it this way, where will that lead? But the second statement, does God will something because it is good? We thought, well, if God's willing something because it is good, it almost indicates that good has already been established and decided. So, which is, I think, what you were saying there, then this is kind of outside God, really. So we thought the first bit, if God wills what is good, and he's decided what is good, the second bit kind of follows on from that, is how we kind of interpret it. I don't know whether we got that right, if that makes sense. But yeah, we thought the second bit almost indicated that good could be decided, and then God's almost following on what has already been decided as good.
Brilliant. Yeah. Aaron?
I think we were very similar to what Phil was saying, maybe pushing back, a bit of a false dichotomy. The first point is that I think the second part of the dilemma is contradictory, because it says goodness is a standard outside of God and before God that God must be obedient to and abide by. But if that's the case, then God isn't God. There's something above him, outside of him. So that's self-contradictory. I suppose the other point as well, I mean, you maybe alluded to it, of saying that it's quite an old question, but we just said, the idea that Plato posed this question, I think in the Timaeus or the Phaedo, one of the early dialogues. I think the first question is closer to the truth, but it also sounds a bit wrong. I suppose sticking with the sort of Platonic way of saying things, you'd want to say that God is the good, and therefore God is the ground of goodness, and so without God you have no goodness. So I think the first way gets close to the way of putting it, but I think there's something still wrong with it, although I can't articulate exactly what's wrong with it. But yeah.
Yeah, as for you really get into the hub of that. It is a trap, and it is based on one of Plato's characters called, I will probably say this wrong, but Euthyphro. I'm having a go. But yeah, that's the Euthyphro dilemma, named after a character in one of Plato's dialogues. And so it's a false dilemma. So the first one, which is something good because God wills it? If you say, yes, something is good because God wills it, then your atheist friend could say, okay, well, what if God willed that hatred was good? It's good to hate, right? If God wills it, it's good. So there we have morality being arbitrary, okay? The good is arbitrary, it's random, it's dependent on what God wills. And then the second part of the dilemma is does God will something because it is already good? And a number of groups hit on that. Well, actually, that's sort of supposing that good exists out here and God has to abide by what is good and therefore cannot be God if he is subject to laws outside of himself. So it's a false dilemma. And the truth is that we don't have to be forced into answering it in any one of those two ways. What we would instead say is that the good flows from God, from his nature, from his character. He defines what is good. And as Aaron said, in Plato's sense, he is the good. He's capital T, capital G. And morality flows necessarily from him. He's not apart from it. It is who he is, and it flows from him. So that's the first dilemma. And yes, it was a cheeky trap and an old one, but we don't need to be forced into either one of those answers. Now, the second one Your friend who's a humanist takes issue with you on the question of homosexuality. They say, look, why do you have to be so judgmental? Morality is relative. What's right for them is right for them, and what's right for you is right for you. You shouldn't judge. Just be tolerant. How do we respond to that? Discuss. Couple more minutes and then we'll get some feedback. Okay, let's get a bit of feedback from each group if we can. Who wants to go first? Hands up. Come on, Mike.
We thought it was another one of his trick questions, really. Is it a trick question? It's a big trick question. Troop. A troop. A troop. Did you look on your phone? Right, okay, so first of all, we just picked up, are there any traps in here? And we said, oh, well, our view is morality is not relative. So that's the first thing. Our view is morality is objective. And our moral objectives are based on the Bible and what's written in the Bible. That's one thing, or two things. Also, we don't believe ourselves to be judgmental because effectively we're all going to be judged by God. The next thing is we're also called to love the sinner, hate the sin as well. So those were our general objectives. General points. Yeah. So morality is objective. Our objective is based on God's standards. It's God who judges, and we're also called by those standards to love the person, hate the sin. Yeah.
Thank you, Mike. Brilliant. Thank you. Another group? How do you respond to this?
Well, we kind of ended up at the point of they're telling us just to be tolerant, so we thought, okay, so can you tolerate my beliefs?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So it's just pointing out the hypocrisy in it, yes. Really.
Very good. Excellent, thank you. Other groups? Anyone else want to share? Well, let's just look at what they've said, and let's see if your friends can pass their own tests here, okay? It's always good to analyze other positions and listen carefully to what's being said here. So can your friend actually pass the test of their own moral viewpoint? So they first say, look, why do you have to be so judgmental? What's that? That's a judgment. Not all judgments are judgmentalism, are they? You can make a judgment without being judgmental, but that is a judgment of you, okay? But you shouldn't be judgmental. You see, that the end of that second sentence, I am judging you, but you shouldn't judge. So what's that? That's a score right there, being inconsistent there. The second thing they say, second sentence, morality is relative. What's right for them is right for them. What's right for you is right for you. You shouldn't judge, just be tolerant. Well, the first thing we might say would be morality is relative. Based on what? How do we know that that's true? Like Mike's group said, we don't believe that it is. So what has convinced you that morality is relative? We could ask that, and it's always a good idea, as we've said before, to ask questions, open questions. What, how, what convinced you of that position? That's a good way to go. But listen, they've put their cards on the table. They've said morality is relative, meaning you have your moral code, I have mine, they have theirs. But then look how they close out with two moral imperatives. You shouldn't judge. So that's a moral imperative. That's a you should not do this. And then what else have we got? You should be tolerant. Two moral imperatives. But wait a minute, I thought all morality was relative. Therefore, this is my morality. How come you're judging mine? Are you saying morality is objective and not relative? So you can see how this view crumbles when it's analysed. At first glance, it feels very persuasive. It's emotional. And we feel a little bit cowed into a corner. But really, when we look at it, it fails its own tests. Just as my friend who I sat with, really bright guy, lovely guy, but said, morality's relative. There's no objective standards. There's no such thing as moral truth. But you should be tolerant. Well, what's that? That's an objective moral standard that's true for you, it's true for me, it's true for everyone at all times, according to him, who just said there's no such thing as moral truth, all morality is relative. So it's a view that commits suicide. It doesn't hold weight. And there's one philosopher that says nobody can live happily and consistently on moral relativism. Nobody can live happily or consistently on moral relativism. That is believing that morality is just relative. There's no absolute truth. We can just all live as we please. So I would say that. But I think, as ever with apologetics, you're right to be concerned about the person sat in front of you. This is a human being, and we answer the human. We don't just answer the argument, do we? So we are, as Peter says, we want to answer with gentleness and respect. And so although we might see, often I do after studying apologetics for years, these things stick out to me, the inconsistencies, they stick out to me. But if I go for the jugular at the inconsistency, sometimes that can actually do damage to that relationship, and I can lose a position to maybe share the gospel with that person. So even though sometimes we see inconsistencies in views, either in person or online, just be mindful about how we're communicating with them. And sometimes, like I said with my friend, it's better for us, can we just sit down over a beer rather than going tete-a-tete in the comments, right? That can get messy very quickly, can't it? Face-to-face, it's easier. And even if we see inconsistencies, I think, there's a lot of good in just being winsome and calm and taking your time and not trying to destroy them. You're not trying to win an argument at the end of the day. We're trying to win the person. So worth thinking about. Guys, it's gone 9 o'clock. So thank you. I hope you've enjoyed the 6 weeks we've had on the apologetics course. We are going to close up there. We're going to close in prayer. If you do have any questions, do come speak to me. And I'm going to leave some books at the front for you to have a look at. If you do want to borrow any of these, that's fine as well. Just let me know you're borrowing them, and do bring them back. But we've got 10 Arguments That Don't Hold Water by Michael Poole on the new atheism. We've got another one, True for You But Not for Me by Paul Copan. He's well worth reading as well. We've got The Intolerance of Tolerance, D.A. Carson. And On Guard, which is William Lane Craig. It's a selection of different arguments and apologetics resources as well that you're welcome to borrow. So I'll put these on the front and have a look at them. But let's pray, shall we? Father God, we give you thanks, Lord, that you are always, Lord, seeking to grow us in our understanding and our knowledge of you. We thank you that you're patient with us. And so, Lord, help us to be patient with others. We thank you, Lord God, that you have given us brains to understand that we're not just random, blobs or whatever roaming around this universe, but instead we were created by a designer with a purpose in mind, that you love us, you've created us for good things. And you're with us this evening by your Spirit. We thank you for all of these wonderful truths. And we thank you that at the end of the day, all we're trying to do, Lord, is present the good news. Lord, not just argue to win a debate, but rather to present the good news that we live in a universe governed by a sovereign God who is both loving and all-wise. And Lord God, we pray that you would help us in all of this to remember that at the heart of all this is the gospel of Jesus Christ. We ask this in your mighty name, Lord. Amen. Amen. Thank you, everybody. God bless. Oh, Garth, yeah.
Could I just let you know, I was looking at the question a few years ago of morality, so I looked in Encyclopedia Britannica how it's defined. And it's defined there by Professor Peter Singer, an Australian bioethicist ethics at Princeton University. He's an evolutionist.
Thank you. All right, thanks, guys. God bless.